Welcome to this week's NORA.startup webinar, when you will meet Tomas Nordheim Alme and Anna Dranovska, who both work with AI and healthcare. Tomas is the chairman of the board at DoMore Diagnostics. He is an educated pediatrician and he's working with e-health innovations since the year 2000. Dranovska is a business developer, co-founder of the Tromsø-based startup Medsensio, closely collaborating with University of Tromsø, the Arctic University of Norway. You will hear more about their research and their startup experience working with AI and health, and we will discuss some of the possibilities and challenges in the field, of which there are plenty. We will start by having these introductions from each of our guests, and then, as always, we will end with a plenary discussion. So my name is Morten Goodwin, and I will facilitate this week's webinar. But this week's webinar, as every webinar, is for you, the audience. So if you have questions for any of the panelists, please do not hesitate to put them in the chat or in the Q&A. We will start out by having a talk by Anna Dranovska, and we will follow by Tomas Alma. So then is, as we heard, a business developer and co-founder of Medsensio, and we're now very excited to hear about Medsensio and your work, Anna. Please, what do you want to tell us?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. So we in Medsensio work with AI and the analysis of health data in the area of respiratory care. We are a young but growing team of individuals with complementary backgrounds, ranging from medicine and clinical research to machine learning and health technology, product development, commercialization, and finance. And we have a strong foundation in research coming from the research under Tromsø Study 7, where there was a large data set collected of lung and heart sounds, which was also annotated, and that laid in the foundation of Medsensio's core technology, which basically gave start to our company. And now we are building product to bring the technology to the market. And the area in which we focus of respiratory health, we found a very meaningful area to work with, because we see that 1 in 7 elderly people in the Western world are suffering from chronic lung conditions. The cost of the care to this patient is constantly growing, and on the world basis, there are more than 300 million of such individuals. When the disease progresses and when they're also growing older, they become large consumers of healthcare, both on the chronic disease management side and when their condition starts getting worse and they require hospitalizations and more interference from the healthcare system. That feeling of not being able to breathe can be very scary. And most of the time, the patients are alone in their homes with their close ones next to them or with non-medical personnel. But that means that they also have limited resources, how they can monitor and how can they follow on their health development in order to provide better management of it. And that means that in many cases they get worse, and in the worst cases, the patients are hospitalized multiple times a year, which is extremely stressful for both the patients and for the healthcare system. So this is the problem that Medsensio tries to tackle with our core technology. And our solution consists of 3 main parts. On one side, it's an off-the-shelf digital stethoscope, which we connect to our app for recording the sounds from the chest. We analyze, send the sounds for analysis to the cloud, and then present the analysis results back in the app. And also we provide a web-based application that can provide a bit more detailed overview of the analysis results. So then we have these 3 components which are involved in the entire user flow. So we have a device that provides the data input. In our case, this is, for instance, body sounds, but it can be also other parameters depending on the device. And the data that this device provides can be received either via cable connection or having a Bluetooth connection. The data that we have from Tromsø study has been recorded with a solution that they developed specifically for the project. This means that if we want to take our solution to the market, we also need to demonstrate compatibility of us with such off-the-shelf devices. And currently there are more than 10 different manufacturers. So Medsensio doesn't want to reinvent the wheel and just make yet another device. We rather focus on the analysis of the data that it provides and the value that that can bring. So we have the app that records the sounds, and we guide the user through the entire process from data capture to presenting the analysis through our app. And we have tested this with both a skilled personnel who has done lung auscultation before, which is examination of lungs with a stethoscope. And we also have tested this with those who have never done it before and seen that it doesn't require a lot of training, and it's a quick learning curve to learn how to do the procedure technically correct. We also provide detection of bad quality of the sounds so that we know which sounds were not good enough, and we either ask the user to re-record those sounds or we simply discard them from the analysis. And we do the analysis on spot, but also save both the sounds and the results in the subject's history of the recordings in order to provide a little bit more historic overview and be able to analyze the data over time. And when we present the results in a short summary on the phone, or we can do it in a more detailed view on the web application, we also supplement the sound by visual representation of this sound to make it easier for the user to follow and grasp the entire picture. So it can be viewed either through our own web dashboard, or we also want the user to be able to see the data from those systems that they already have in place, which requires certain integrations from our side to those third-party providers. From users' point of view, we have the person who is technically doing the procedure on one side with the patient. It can be healthcare personnel guided through our app. And we also have a team who can be involved even remotely for reviewing more objective data and taking into account that data when they do further decision making. And they coordinate necessary follow-up and make decisions together with the healthcare personnel on the patient side. One particular thing about the patients with chronic lung conditions and auscultation is that traditional way listening to their lungs with a traditional stethoscope creates only one-time points when it's one personnel who is collecting the data, who is analyzing it and saving the results, which makes it very subjective, inconsistent, and also not possible to compare across multiple time points. What we are trying to tackle with giving machine learning analysis of the results is that we provide the analysis more objective and we are able to connect the dots. So it allows either comparing two different instances of patients' encounter with the healthcare personnel, or we can also build up historic context over multiple time points and then both view it into the historic trends perspective and use the same data to develop potential predictions of further development of the condition. Because when we are dealing with chronic patients, that also involves like their condition is not stable. They can be in a normal condition, they can get exacerbation of their stable situation, and eventually they recover back to normal. So that means that the condition is never the same. It is in constant development. And for us to be able to better address the disease management, we want to learn more about the development and of the condition. And this is where using machine learning analysis of their lung sound development and other symptoms development over time builds up to more consistent and more personalized approach to disease management. But as a medical device startup, we are operating in an area that is very complicated from many points of view. Firstly, we are required to follow medical device regulations before we place our device on the market. And since we do not have any hardware of our own, we only provide software and AI. We are classified as software as medical device. So that means that we need to document that the entire development of the product has been done in a quality assured way, and that we also took risk management closely at every step of the way when developing our solution. It is also a lot of concerns around health data and information security. So for instance, during our testing, we are using only anonymous data, and lung sounds by themselves are not personally identifiable. So it means that we have flexibility to do testing of our product without having to worry about personal data. But if we want to leverage the possibility of historic data overview and analysis across multiple time points, we need to implement information security system that allows to handle such health data, which we have a large focus on right now. And also being able to test the product before it becomes commercial is a crucial side in here. So the Tromsø study has given us a unique starting point with probably one of the world's largest annotated quality data sets of lung sounds. But for us to also test that our software is user-friendly and that it works as intended with those use cases that we defined for ourselves, we have a large focus on developmental partners who provide constant feedback on improving our functionality. And during such testing, we also get new data. So it's a constant inflow of new data that helps us to build up our library of lung sounds and other health parameters. And it also helps to constantly improve the algorithms. And then, as I mentioned, that our web application can integrate with external systems because we exist in a very complex ecosystem of both existing equipment and different hardware tools, but also those e-health platforms and other systems that are already in use at the healthcare institutions today. So we need to make sure that we fit into existing workflows and into existing routines, and integrations with such external systems is also one of the sides. So where do we save our results from the analysis and how do we present it so that it's understandable, but it's also providing the same value as we intended. So we are following FHIR specification to also test integrations with such different providers of external systems. And these are one of the main conditions that we are trying now to fulfill before we're able to place our product on the market, which we hope will be very, very soon. So I think we can probably discuss more of these conditions later on in the Q&A round, but these were the main points that I wanted to bring up. And if there are any more questions, I can also be contacted on my work email. So thank you, Morten.
Great, Anna. I'm always amazed by the work that comes out of Tromsø, and this just builds upon a lot of the health work that comes out of there. So one thing that made me a bit curious was this is a tool that is working in the medical field, of course. Have you considered what to show patients versus what to show medical doctors? Because these are two very different user groups. What is your decision there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, our first version will be targeted mostly towards healthcare personnel. So not doctors, but personnel like nurses and also assistant nurses and other healthcare people. And even for them, we also have difference what we want to show, not to overwhelm them with the amount of information and detail. So that's why we also decided that on the app we can have a more simple feedback, that the procedure that I have done has been done correctly, the data is of high quality, and that it can be analyzed further on properly, and that I know that I have done my part well. But then the main decision weight needs to still be on the qualified personnel who can and is in charge of making the decisions. So that's why we also provide the web dashboard where other personnel can also be more involved and review this data in context of also other parameters, because we can't only isolate the data that we analyze and say that this is all and this is what we base our decision on, as the health situation is complex and there are many symptoms that come into.
Exactly. That sounds very smart, because as a patient, I would be overwhelmed with everything that's happening.
Yeah.
So we'll look forward to having you in the debate and panel discussion later on. And while we wait for more talk from Anna, we will listen to Tomas Nordheim Alme, who will present more about DoMore Diagnostics. So Tomas is a pediatrician, so you understand a bit more about this data than has only experienced this as a patient. Please. Let us know what to do more diagnostics.
So I just should mention, thank you for having me. I should mention that I would like that app very much when auscultating the kids. That is sometimes very hard, and some support would be good. I'm here today to talk about a company that is called DoMore Diagnostics, and I'm the chairman of the board of this company. It is a quite new company. It was incorporated last fall, but it stands on the shoulders of a large project called the DoMore project, which was a lighthouse project. That's the Norwegian Research Council projects from 2016 to 2021. And you see here almost all the people that have participated in this large project. So we are we're not starting from scratch, but we are commercializing some of the inventions from this project. The field that we're in, and I should perhaps go into the terminology first. The field that we're in is pathology, and we call it in silico pathology. And the reason for this is that, the pathology, that's the medical specialty of looking in the microscope at pieces of human tissue, like cancer tumors, for instance. Digital pathology, when we say that, we mean that we have taken those images or those slides and made images of them, and we can distribute them, and we can store them digitally, and we can annotate them and sort of work with them, but still they're just images that we look at. So in silico pathology is when we start using the information that is digitalized through the image and let the computers work on that. And the thing is that the DoMore, the name of the project has to do with the need to do more, because pathologists are becoming, or have been for a long time, a bottleneck, especially in cancer care. It's not that they aren't good at what they do, because they are, but we don't have enough of them. And also, it's sort of like all medicine, it's a subjective, subjective skill. So we observe significant inter and intra-observer variations. And another sort of elephant in the room is that if you take a section, what we're looking at are sections, very nanometer thin slices of tumors. And you can imagine, if you have a tumor this big, it would matter if you take your slice there or there or there. And since we don't have many pathologists, we have to take only a few slides. But if we had a computer that could help us with this, we could take many more slides. Another thing is that pathologists are really, really good at detecting cancer. If you give a pathologist a slide and say, are there any cancer cells here or not, they're very good at making that decision. What they are not good at, or lack the tools for, is to say, how bad is it, doctor? am I going to die from this or am I not going to die from this? So the prognostication, that they don't have, pathologists don't have enough tools to say, is this bad? Is this not bad? So I'll give you some examples. Keep in mind that I'm sort of simplifying this a little bit. So if there are any cancer specialists, you will notice that I've sort of simplified it a little bit. But these are numbers from something called a KESAR-2 study, more than 1,000 patients with colorectal cancer, cancer from the bowel, and where they basically asked the pathologist to say, is the prognosis good, grade 1? Is it bad, grade 3? Or is it intermediate? And these are Kaplan-Meier plots that are survival plots. So you see the years going by on the x-axis and the survival on the y-axis. So you see, if you have a grade 1, you're pretty lucky, because chances are you will survive a number of years, and even with sort of not too hard treatment. So this is the poor group. And what you notice is that, the differences aren't really that bad. We're not sure, is it really significant? And we have the intermediate group, which sort of clutters it all together. So can we make any decisions? If it was your cancer, your decision, should I take treatment A or B? How would you feel about a curve like this? So then the research question here was, can we use AI to improve? And I mean, answer is yes. This is, for those of you with good eyesight, you will see that this is Lancet, which is a prestigious journal. So one of the projects actually made it to Lancet last fall. And it seems we can predict with AI the prognosis better than pathologists can. So this is not just helping, but it's sort of improving. This is a piece of a tumor from the bowel, and there's a number of things going on here. This is the tissue. It's stained with something called HE staining. That's the most common staining. That is what you do standardized all over the world, every kind of tumor. So this is, these images are already available. So the green line here is the alignment of the tumor. So we have taught the computer how to find the tumor versus normal tissue, which is here. We needed the computer to learn, or the AI to learn from a pathologist. So we actually had the pathologist draw around the tumor, and then the computer learned from this. So that's the first thing. But the second thing, we are, as I said, we are not actually trying to have the AI copy the work of the pathologist, because when it comes to prognostication, the pathologist really doesn't know if it's a bad prognosis or a good prognosis. So in this case, because we have a huge material of cancers and several materials from several countries, we actually knew how it went with the patient. We knew if the patient died from cancer or not, and at which time point. So don't make me explain this too much, but as you can see, what we do, we have a scan. We do the segmentation, that is sort of drawing the line around the tumor. Then we divide the tumor into tiles, and we run it through a number of models. And then for each model, we end up with a score. And we do this actually at 2 different tile sizes. And that is kind of funny, because this is what pathologists do. They look in the microscope at different magnifications. And what we found is that we could improve the model by using 2 magnifications and then combining the score, so that we get at the end the two models, or the two actually set of models, agree that it's either a good prognosis, or they agree that it's a bad prognosis, or they disagree. So we say, okay, we can't say. And if we look back, there was one point I forgot to make, and that is sort of crucial. If we look back here at this Kaplan-Meier plot, you see the numbers here. Of the more than 1,000 tumors, only for 45 were the pathologists able to say that, you know, this is a good prognosis, and for 168, this is a poor prognosis. And most of the slides, the pathologist wasn't really sure if it was a good or bad prognosis. So when we come to this same Kaplan-Meier plot, this is the same patients, this is the same slides. The machine says 704 of these tumors actually have a good prognosis, and 270 have a bad prognosis, and only 136 are sort of undecisive. And as you can see, the distance between the red and the green curve here is much larger, so it's a much more significant difference, and we can actually use this for something. And the consequence of this is that if you have, because that is how colon cancer works, for those who have this form, the survival is over 80%, and giving a high load of chemotherapy on top of the surgery only improves a little bit. The survival is only a little bit improved. So for most patients, it would be actually better not to have the chemo, and you would survive just as long. But the only problem was we couldn't identify who they were. Now you can see here, we have identified 63% of the patients that may even not need any chemo. Let me just be clear that we can't from our data say, you know, no chemo at all. But what we can say is that you have a much better prognosis than this group. And on the other hand, this group would probably need more than the standardized chemo, because the survival benefit of the chemo for this group is actually quite poor. So there are two distinct markets for the type of technology that we are working with. It's the clinical diagnostic market, which I've sort of explained about now, and then there's the pharma research market. For the colorectal cancer that I just showed you, there's about 1.8 million patients every year, and so the sort of high volume service market is a very interesting market. We can identify the patients with low risk that need little or no chemo in addition to the surgery. Then we have another product in the pipeline that I don't have time to talk about today, but that is basically the same product, but for lung cancers. Lung cancers are a completely different beast. The variation is much bigger, the uncertainty is much bigger, and also the pharmaceutical industry is at a sort of different stage there, because there are so many new treatments coming up and which are being tested. And we think that this product will fit the pharmaceutical market very well, because it will help them separate, you know, this specific treatment will work for these patients with these types of cancer cells, and this specific treatment may work for those. So it will make it easier for pharmaceutical companies to know if for which type of cancers their new treatments will work. So that's a completely different market, but within the same big space. This was sort of what I was going to introduce with, and I'm happy to answer questions during the panel discussions.
Great. Another useful, very useful product, Thomas. So that's very exciting to see that this research comes out. It's exciting to see that this academic research sometimes gets into the real world, if you can use those words. One thing that I'm curious about that came from the audience, you used the word better in form of that the AI can do better prognostics than the pathologist. Could you elaborate a bit on what you mean by better? Is it more clear?
Yeah, so as I showed with the Kaplan-Meier curves, for colon cancer, pathologists don't really have the tools. How do I see if this is a good prognosis or bad prognosis? There are some criteria, but as you can see, when we use this criteria in this material, we don't really separate very well. So it's too the differences are too small for us to dare to take action on it. So would you not choose to have chemo based on the small separation? So the issue, of course, is what is it that the AI can see that we don't see? That is the interesting question, because that's part of the thing that we really don't know.
But and what are you using as the ground truth then? The ground truth is survival of patients. Yes.
Yeah. So we know the survival, and also, I mean, for anyone that has done this, there's a number of sort of practical problems, like, for instance, which scanner did you use, or how much stain did you use when you prepared the slide, and other things that you may overtrain on. So I should say that this project, we didn't sort of just start and doing stuff. We have a lot of theoretical knowledge from people trained in this since, for years and years before we started to do this. So that we have several different materials, training materials and validation materials and so on.
So your recommendation would be to build knowledge first and then wait. Kind of
professors of bioinformatics use them. They know stuff. That would be my recommendation.
Sometimes professor knows stuff. So Anna, we would like to include you back in the debate here. So one question that came to you is on the use of body sensors. The amount of data that comes from body sensors keep growing. Are you using body sensors at all, or is it only X-ray, MRI type of images in your work?
We use mainly the stethoscope as our input.
Yeah.
So that means that we don't have the sounds coming in constantly and we constantly analyze them, but it's more like we analyze one procedure and then we build it up in the history of those individual encounters.
Right. So that's
but this is something that we definitely are very interested in, how if we have those sensors that provide the data non-stop, that we can analyze it. That would be ideal if there is a patient with a chronic condition just living their life being monitored, and we can know when the patient starts getting worse and be able to interfere. So hopefully in some future, hopefully not so distant, we can do that as well.
But you also risk finding, let's say, correlations that are not really the cause of things there. So the curse of dimensionality, when you add more data sensors, you can find things that are not really causal effects. So it's kind of a, how do you balance this at all? Or is it not considered yet?
We haven't considered that yet because we haven't collected the data non-stop. Right. So when that comes, that will be a new issue. Yeah.
Good. So the first question I will ask you, both of you, is you both come from academic worlds and you go into the world of entrepreneurship, of startups, etc. What would be your recommendation if there's some research professors out there in similar field? How should I go about if I want to make a successful startup company from my research, for example? Tomas, if you start with you.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure if I have the perfect answer to this, but at least, you know, as always, it's good to create a group with people that know stuff that you don't. So I'm part of this group. I don't know much about pathology, to be honest, and I don't know much about AI. I mean, I'm interested in it, but I'm not a professor of informatics. But I know a little bit about commercializing e-health inventions, and also we have several people on the staff that knows about this. And then also the universities normally have organizations for commercialization of so work with them. And sometimes it's sort of hard because we don't have the same language. So again, I think, you know, having people on your team that know about this is crucial. And also, I tried to sort of have 2 slides on that. Know what the market is. because as I showed you, we have two different products, which is really the same product, but two different cancers. But because of how those two cancers behave and what the status is for the treatment of those two cancers, they're actually two different markets. And you have to sort of be very sensitive to that. Otherwise, you will probably bark. The chance is that you will bark up the wrong tree and spend all your money. Right.
If you make a very good product, but nobody wants to buy it, it's a waste of time, maybe. What do you think, Anna? What would be your recommendation if I'm to start in the startup world?
Yeah, well, I don't represent medical sites or clinical sites or AI or technology anyhow. I studied commercialization of research-based ideas. So that was my way in, and got introduced to the team that built up Medsensio before there was any Medsensio. I got introduced through such network as Thomas mentioned, because every university has technology transfer office of sorts that helps commercialize in the research that's coming from there. But I think one of the main issues is that not always research thinks in the same KPIs as are needed for a startup. So starting up and building a product is not something that is the main goal when you are researching. When you research, you want to publish. That's your reward. So bringing into a different kind of rewards for researchers also would be important, and knowing how to communicate what they do because that needs to start from the early stages when you are just planning something and not when your paper is published and then the whole work is done. So communication and speaking about what you do is also very important to learn.
That's very insightful. So we have a strange reward system saying that we publish is kind of what makes us happy. It's a little bit strange, but that's the life we live in. But what about the approval process? When you develop a product software, Anna, there's, at least as I understand it, a quite cumbersome improvement process. So how do you go about, Anna?
Well, we are not approved yet. We're working on that, and it's a very painful path that we have to take, painful but necessary. And there are a lot of regulations that we are trying to map out and fulfill. So it's important to collect a network of people who have done something similar like that before and who can help you, because involving external consultants on regulatory questions can become very expensive very quick. And as a startup, we have limited resources and also limited time. So now we have the medical device regulations that come into force, and it is challenging. And there are also not many startups that have done that before, and especially software as medical device is a very new type of medical devices, but there are more and more of them. I think the main challenge is that regulatory people are not always thinking in the same terms as software development people. And that the life cycles are different, and how you document versus how you develop, it's a very, very complex thing.
Yes,
I agree. I mean,
yes, Thomas.
Yeah, I fully agree on this. The whole thing about this, the software regulatory, it stems from the building of machine engineering of machines, and so agile isn't that isn't the word in that world. So, but what I think is that it would be useful if software developers, as a part of their sort of background knowledge, knew when they started that, okay, I'm going to build something that's going to be a medical device. I need to do it right from the start, because it always happens as an afterthought. And I've been part of that process a couple of times where you go for the approval very late in the process, and it's more work then. But it's doable, and there are levels of it, and yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's nice to hear. But if you take it completely differently, if you look at it as from a startup point of view, maybe they don't have so much research experience or something like that, but they still want to go into this field. So what type of skills would you say that is essential for some of the startups that are listening to us to get into your field, for example, Thomas?
Well, I think if you are thinking about AI and medicine, I think that one of the biggest mistakes the AI side have done, and especially the big giants. I mean, I remember first time I went to I think Vegas to talk to IBM about Watson. And the Watson hype. Is that allowed? Am I allowed to say that?
I think that's very
yeah. So the overselling of what we can do is the worst enemy of the whole field. So what you need to do is, okay, if you know the methods, you know how to do, let's say, image processing, you need to know the medicine, and you need to have people on board that understands the medicine, and that understands the sort of as I said, the informatics part of this, which has a lot to do with statistics. Otherwise, you will probably be chasing your tail on finding things that are correlations but not causality. So that is one thing. And then once you have your invention, it's all the other things. It's about marketing. It's about the regulatory things. It's about running a business, which can be learned. But my first startup was a learning project. It didn't go very well, but at least I learned a lot from it. So perhaps it has to be that way.
And we're very glad that you're pushing that experience down to us so that we don't have to make the same mistakes. Very good, Thomas. So one thing that has come up is several times is privacy. And I noticed, Anna, that you do some of the calculations in the cloud. How do you make sure that the privacy is concerned or is protected when you do that type of work?
Yeah, well, firstly, just some word of that data is handled in the cloud is not
Please.
that negative. The cloud is pretty safe these days. And in our initial testing, we try to stick for as long as we can to totally anonymized data. And when we just record sounds from one person, one instance, then we don't save any personal data at all. But now we are working and on implementing the information security for handling health data. And it's just a bunch of procedures. It's a lot of paperwork in addition to all of the other medical regulatory paperwork, but it's doable. So.
And you also had a situation where you continuously improve your algorithms. Every time you do a new analysis, you push the data back. Wasn't that correct? And you make sure that this is kind of that not malicious data, wrong data is coming into your system?
Well, firstly, we filter out, of course, that data that we consider bad quality data, which we also have labeled what we consider bad quality data and that we don't include into analysis. And we ask the user to re-record, for instance. But then we annotate additional data as we go so that we can improve on the specific equipment that we are using, because using different equipment for input can also be a little bit varied sound that we get. So, and also, yeah, so it's not that it's just every time we are recording a new recording, we're including it into the training. We are taking those instances when we say that we need to, these were the sounds that we need to annotate additionally and then include into the testing.
Right. So in my simple mind, if you use kind of public medical data into a commercial product, it causes some challenges. Is that the wrong assumption, Thomas?
Sorry, to take.
So the cancer data comes from a public hospital,
yeah,
and now it's in part of a private company.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is also solvable, and in this case, the private company is a vehicle for the university. So the university will benefit from the success of the company. And that is vital, because these are the sort of society's resources that has been used on this. So even if we are going out and start as a startup, and we have we will have investors from outside and so on. Still, the university has to benefit from it. Otherwise, it's not right. And but that's also how these lighthouse research projects that this was a part of. That's how they work. There was just, can I just comment? There was, I saw there was a comment on the chat on using survival as ground truth, and that is a very good question. And I would agree that I wouldn't use that in any circumstance, but in this circumstance, it is cancer-specific deaths. So this is part of a research, sort of a research material that is very specific. And that is the problem when you can't take what we have done and just apply it to production data from a hospital, because that would open up a new box of problems for you. So that is important to understand, that if you're going to run things on production data, that is a totally different ballgame.
Because in your case, you know very well what the deaths come from. It's not like from different circumstances people become old. It is from cancer, and then that makes it a reliable way to test it.
Exactly, and as I also said, there are more details into this, because some of the important part here, the survival, is the ground truth. But for instance, learning the machine how to recognize the tumor, there the ground truth is the pathologists that we have used to train the algorithms, because we didn't have that material anywhere else. And there are also other methods where sort of pathologists, for instance, they will count cells in different stadiums. And that also then, the ground truth is something a human has done before, and that's how you train it. But on the prognostication specific part, the prognosis is, are you going to die or not? And we know that these people, for sure, they died or they survived more than 10 years.
And what have you used other clinical data, like, for example, genetic mutation? Apparently there's something called CRAS. I don't know about this.
Yeah, not for this. I mean, it's definitely a good question. It's definitely interesting. So, but it's sort of, and one could imagine that one could pull together prognosis based on how the tumor looks, and then there are other clinical information that is important, and then you can on top of that put the genetic components, but we haven't done that in this product.
Just for the audience who's not a medical expert, what is CRAS? Do you know?
Yeah, so CRAS, that has to do with it's a marker for specific proteins that you can look at in the cell, and that will basically tell you something about how this cell will behave. And it's important, and CRAS is important for colorectal cancer.
Okay, good. So might be from a medical researcher, this question, I would expect. But what about medical data in general? Is it possible to elaborate a bit on the challenges and opportunities by preparing such medical data, especially when there's a gap in tools from domain experts? That they're not tools that are not that well working today, as I understand the question. How is this process working? Is there a lot of work to fine-tune the data before you can use it, Anna?
I can't go too deeply into technical details on preparing the data, but you need to have anyways people on the team who will help you to be available when you need to help with additional data annotations and figure out which exact approaches are working when you are developing your approach for labeling the data. And
right, but you spend a lot of effort on it, not you personally, but someone.
Yeah, and it's a lot of just hours that go into it. Of course, you can use your own tools also helping to pre-analyze some of the data, and eventually at some point you also start noticing that the points where the algorithm starts getting challenges is also where you as a human are starting getting challenges how to help and annotate it properly.
Both of you have talked about these are the tools you have now, but we are looking at more opportunities. There's a lot of exciting things. How do you sort out? I think it's easy, at least in my world, to get very excited about a lot of things and start. And maybe we should look at this cancer type. Maybe we should look at this lung disease, versus focusing on one approach and sticking with this. Anna.
Oh, starting with where our core technology was developed is that it's a area of lung auscultation is a very broad one. Stethoscope is a device that has been used for 200 years in multiple of different use cases and applications in medical field. So it is extremely important to separate one case where you want to demonstrate that this is where your technology is bringing value both for the users and where it is a commercially sustainable idea to approach it from go-to-market point of view. And then you can't just jump in between different applications. So you have to stick to one. That's where you have the team of people who are staying focused on one direction, because especially if you choose one direction, there you start getting more of different challenges related to regulatory and data privacy and commercialization and testing and so on. So you can't do many parallel directions when each of them is so resource heavy.
Right. Interesting. So there's a lot of questions here about data collection. So maybe you can elaborate a bit more on that. It seems we didn't delve too deep into it. So for example, according to some of our listeners, they have experienced that it's very hard to collect data outside of academia, outside of hospitals. Thomas, are you still collecting data in your research or in your innovation?
Yeah, so I mean, this is very hard. In our instance, the data that we have used, they were sort of given, the patient has sort of given permission, and that is the key. You know, always if you get the permission, you have basically very little problem. So and they had given sort of wide permission, any kind of research that could benefit cancer development or cancer research is sort of, they have allowed that. So so we didn't really go into that problem, but there are I don't know if you heard of, there's another big project that started the same time as ours, which is called the Big Med project in Oslo, and they sort of dwelled right into that, where they were saying, okay, the hospital information system have so much data, can we use it? And they sort of been, and that was the purpose of the project, or one of the purposes of the project, was to sort of bang their head against that wall hard enough and long enough to create some change where we can actually start to use that data in a legal sense without going back in time and asking all the patients that have their information documented there, can we pretty please use this data? Because that is at least in the Norwegian legislation, that is not permitted. So that is, and also for us, we used images, and there's when it comes to data quality, as I mentioned, it has to do with printers and all, you know, scanners and how do you scan and everything like that. But when it comes to like text, for instance, that's again a whole different ball game. How did someone document, let's say, a murmur sound of the heart, and there we sort of, then we get into ontologies and how do we understand text and how do we understand our language when it comes to describing, and that's a different ball game again. So again, you have to sort of, I think, you know, to your last question, you have to sort of narrow down and say, okay, what is it that I can do with the amount of resources that I have, and not sort of spread around the whole field and say that, you know, I know these AI tools, because then probably you will be too ambitious on what you can solve.
And we hear a lot about these ambitious AI tools. And when you work in the medical field, I understand there's a lot of skepticism from medical doctors to use these type of tools, especially when they're kind of black boxy. I'm not so fan of the big word black box, but still it's kind of not so easy to understand everything that happens in it. So what is your experience there, Anna? Do you feel that medical doctors are skeptical to your black box algorithm, or do you expect a change in that attitude in the future?
I think the key here is not to use AI as self-purpose. So we are not doing AI for the sake of AI and for the sake of analysis. We need to understand where exactly it fits into that work that clinical professionals are doing, the doctors and the nurses, and how exactly does it change what I do today, and what is it new that I'm going to do, and what is it, maybe it's also in uncertainty around, I don't really know how it's going to change my everyday and how it's going to affect it. So it's not the hostility against the algorithms and AI themselves, it's around the application of it, I guess, which in many cases might be just a very uncertain area.
Right. And is your experience the same, Thomas? I've heard that some of the pathology departments are not even digital yet, and you're talking about this very fancy technology tool.
Well, that's an interesting thing in itself, because in one of my first slides I showed this sort of digital pathology, and that has gone extremely slow. It's one of the slowest parts of medical informatics there is, and that is probably because the value of just putting your slides into your screen is limited compared to the cost of all the equipment you need and all the storage space you need. So one way of seeing it is that in silico pathology would actually be the driver for digital pathology, because then you can use the data for something more than just looking at it on your screen. And so I think that will explain that. When it comes to the black box thing, I know that we make a problem from, or we talk about it as a problem. I'm not sure if we have really tried it on the clinicians enough to say that they are skeptical. I think we are more saying that they will probably be skeptical because we can't, at least we think we can, when it comes to a new, let's say a genetic analysis method, we can sort of argue that, okay, it's this protein and it has to do with this, and then this happens and so on. I think we should be humble enough to say that even in that field, our knowledge about what is really happening inside the cell is somewhat limited. So we think we know what's going on, but we get surprised time after time. So I think that, you know, it's very interesting. Someone asked if this is sort of where we are in the process with this. We just we have signed an agreement with a very big chain of laboratories. So this year we will start to do the first 200 analyses of tumors to provide the prognosis to cancer patients, and then we will see. You know, the proof here will be, does it affect the treatment decision? Because you should know that and understand that if you get this diagnosis, and you most likely, this category of patients most likely don't need a treatment, and they get a treatment that almost kills them. And it actually kills 1% of those who get the treatment. So the benefit of getting to know that, okay, you don't need this treatment is actually quite big.
Yeah. That's very insightful there. And you're kind of saying that the human body is a black box in itself, so that it is.
We should always be humble. We should always be humble and not say that we know how. I mean, okay, we won't know how this functions for a number of years, perhaps never. But you know, if we do the studies right, we can say at least, okay, if we say they have better prognosis and they don't die, then probably there's something to it.
Absolutely. Last question to both of you. We'll start with Thomas. If you think of a NORA.startup where you're now at, so how would you ideally see NORA.startup helping your research or your innovation world? 5 years from now, NORA.startup has helped you. Let's just say, how have they helped you?
Okay, there are a number of things. Just being in an environment where we can discuss this like we are now, I find that very refreshing, and it will probably be, you know, it's a good meeting for me, good experience for me. Then I think that NORA and also the NORA.startup may be a sound voice in the AI. In the medical field, in the debate there, because we have had so much of the overselling. And if we could sort of have a more sort of sensible and humble discussion on what do we think can happen here, that will actually help us, because it's the overselling that is kind of hitting us now, because everyone has said that Dr. Watson or IBM Watson could solve this many years ago. It was 2016, they have solved the whole cancer puzzle. It was there, they said it. So that will be a benefit if there were an environment in Norway that sort of were able to be trustworthy on this. And then it's a meeting place between people with different knowledges and different backgrounds, and that is always valuable.
Trustworthiness is absolutely something we strive for. So what about you, Anna? How would NORA.startup be an ideal partner for you?
I think it's also important when we are able to build exposure and to build connections and dialogue. It's not a large field of working with that specific medical data where we work, for example. So attracting new people to become interested in it is extremely valuable. And also, once we establish such contacts, helping to build clear expectations to each other. When you have academia on one side, where you have startups on another side, or even two startups or two academia, the collaboration, the best foundation for collaboration is when everyone is clear about their expectations and they can match them early on. And I think very often it might also create uncertainties. What can we publish? What do we expect to publish? What about IP? How do we regulate it? We collaborate now. Where does it lead? Do you have any commercial interest later on, or are you doing this only for research? Who is going to own it in the end? Do you have any ideas how to take it on further? And like, you know, a lot of practical and legal and IP related elements around the collaboration of different partners that might slow down any potential collaboration if we are speaking of it, because we might not know how to approach it correctly, or where to start even with it, or maybe not enough time that we spend dedicated to such questions. And then, like, you know, the clearer the foundation and the more open the dialogue with good tools around, that can facilitate the process very well.
Very good. So that's also very insightful. And I think all of the questions you pinpointed there should be part of NORA.startup and maybe NORA.startup webinars following. So we'll round up this session now. We've heard presentations from Tomas Nordheim Alme and Anna Dranovska. We've talked about AI in healthcare. And we have had a lot of questions where we did not have time to answer. We will collect them and try to answer them at a later stage. And for all of you listening, please go to the NORA website and see if this is collaboration that might fit you. Next Friday, we will have another webinar, and in 2 weeks, we will have another NORA startup webinar. And then it's only left to wish you a nice weekend. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you too. Have a nice weekend.